Mr. Chairman. Last year, I worked alongside Chairman Mast and our Financial Services Committee Chairman Hill as we negotiated a package to update the Caesar sanctions on Syria to fit with the present period and the present leadership. Ultimately, the Caesar Act was repealed as part of last year's NDAA. But we did fight to include a mechanism for sanctions to be imposed if certain conditions are not met by al-Shara and his government. Mr. Tabler, do you think this is an effective compromise to allow for the interim government to expand their economy while keeping the pressure on them, as you were just alluding to with Ms. Jayapal?
It's an excellent question. I think it has two levels. One, the way that the sanctions were repealed, I think were quite rational, in that the original reason for them being there, and I worked with Ambassador Jeffrey on implementing these sanctions in great detail during COVID. So I think that lifting them was the rational thing to do. But the problem that there are many other things in the Caesar sanctions that are of concern to the United States. And so therefore, if those benchmarks are not met, it is worth revisiting them because, very frankly, because the Şara government cares about that, right? And this is a major point of leverage over their behavior. And right now, nobody's here is talking about regime change or anything messy like that. We're simply talking about modifying the behavior of the Şara government, its security forces and so on, as it goes forward as a result concerning minorities and others.
So to that end, what pressure can we put on al-Shara's government absent Caesar? And to what extent do you see Syria's state sponsor of terrorism designation as effective leverage?
Yeah, so that's a big one that's coming up. I think it is tremendous leverage. I think the one immediate thing we're talking about a very early implementation is concerning President Trump's engagement with Ahmed Şara himself personally. So if we were to look at this, any communication between President Trump and Ahmed Şara, and I think this has been communicated, that this agreement on the 30th of January needs to be implemented because it concerns a very sensitive issue as concerns minority rights, also strategic places where U.S. forces are. This line needs to be enforced. And I think the administration, as well as Capitol Hill, is prepared to do that.
So al-Shara continues to position himself as a moderate and pragmatic leader for Syria, given the alternatives that may be true. But, even though he is often sending diplomats to D.C. and has visited the White House, he's still growing closer with Russia. There are concerns about that, not to mention, obviously, his past terrorist ties. Mr. Jeffrey, do you view al-Shara as an honest broker? Based on what he has done in the past few months, do you trust him or are you wary of his assurances?
I'm wary, but I also have seen when we were working in the first Trump administration, key to much of what we're trying to do in Syria, which was not only to defeat ISIS, it was to get all of the Iranians out and to have a reconciled and peaceful Syria. Those were our three core goals. In all of them, objectively, what al-Shara was doing in Idlib with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham supported what we were doing. Now, we couldn't give him orders or talk to him because he was on the terrorist list, but we generally knew what he was up to, fighting Assad, cleaning the area from ISIS, and as I mentioned earlier, keeping 3 million internally displaced people who would have destabilized Turkey if they fled across the border. I was right there with them. I saw they were living in makeshift shelters and tents. And so he was giving, under the conditions of horror that I've seen in much of the Middle East, I thought Idlib was basically a bright spot. Now, he did some bad things in Idlib. Frankly, our Kurdish friends did some bad things in their areas as well. But all in all, he's somebody that we've been able to work with. Let's just see what happens next. And the most important thing is executing this 29 January agreement.
Now, obviously, there's been some positive steps with Saudi Arabia and others with economic investments, which, is critical to actually get this on the right track. One of the most important things has been the discussions between the U.S., Israel, and Syria with respect to de-escalation and intelligence sharing. And there are reports of upcoming talks to finalize this. Mr. Jeffrey, in your opinion, what would this type of security agreement mean for both Israel, Syria, and the region?
First of all, it would stabilize the rather rocky relationship between Damascus and Israel, and probably end, although they've pretty well settled down now, Israeli military operations inside Syria, which were quite extensive right after the al-Shara government came to power. I think it's important because, again, Israel's core interest is not having an Iranian proxy on its northern border. And it doesn't have one now because al-Shara rolled in and the Iranians had to retreat. As long as Israel can maintain al-Shara as a partner in that particular endeavor, then I think that there's a basis for a relationship. But as we've talked about for the last 2 hours, Iran will come back in if the country starts falling apart. So it's not just not being nice to the Iranians, it's also being nice to the minorities to the degree that they don't start looking for allies, because I've had several indications Iran is trying to get back in and find partners.
Appreciate it. Thank you.